Another bonus video. Had loads of requests to show you how I do my beading. My beading is done using invisible thread. So it's slightly different, and I use a slightly different technique to how most people might expect you to. So obviously on the requests of others, I've done the video. You would think that invisible thread wouldn't be able to be recorded, but it looks like you can. It's not very easy, admittedly, but we've managed it. So sit back, relax. This is me beading. Well, hello all. Here we are with my lovely chatelaine. So this is the long-awaited video where people have been asking me, could I do a video showing them how I do my beading with invisible thread, because obviously that's what I use. So just to sort of show the difference for those that don't know, obviously there's different threads that you can use. Everyone has a different preference. Obviously I used to do beading before I done stitching. That was predominantly more what I did. As an example, I've got some pieces here that I never actually finished. So I've got like these where I was turning them into earrings with the thread. What else have I got? Oh, we've actually got an earring that's finished with a Swarovski, but again, this is all beadwork. So I've done beadwork for a while, so I've worked with the different threads of beading thread. For those that are looking for an option to work with 2 strands and use something like Nymo, the Nymo thread, then obviously head on over to Jessie Marie Does Stuff, because she's just done an amazing beading tutorial where she uses that, and she uses it in a way that you end up using 2 strands of it. Well, I've got something that's similar to that that I've also beaded with, which is called KO. Let me zoom back out. So this is KO thread. So it's similar to the Nymo thread. The only difference is obviously Nymo thread is a bit more like a flat, it's almost like a flat thread, whereas this KO thread is still very, very circular. It's very round, so it's still like a normal piece of cotton, and it works in exactly the same way. It comes in all different, it comes in the little spools. You get 55 yards on there, or 50 meters, depending on whether you work in metric or not. It comes in various amounts of different colours. If I can find some over here, just to show you. So lots of different colours that they come in. See? And these equally could be used to do your projects on, or to use with your projects. So if you really didn't fancy using invisible thread, and you can't get your hand on any Nymo thread, then you've always got KO thread. So like I said, I use invisible thread. I do have a preference, same as the next person, for the invisible thread. Then now you need to be careful. Well, so you need to be careful. So just for clarity, there's 2 different types of invisible thread that you can actually purchase. One is made of nylon, and one is made of polyester. Now, my preference is to stitch on polyester. Polyester, normally I use the monopoly superior thread. It's almost like a non-sheer, so it hasn't got too much shine to it. But as you can see, today we're going to be beading on my lovely chatelaine. So we're going to put beads into the tree here. But just to prove that, you know, the invisible thread isn't as hard as you might think once you've mastered it, or once you've got your head around it. So, I mean, this one you'll see is really, really shiny. This is the one that came with the kit for the chatelaine. You can see it's super, super shiny. It is super slippery, which tells me that this is actually a nylon invisible thread. So don't know how much you can see. So if I show you that, that's the invisible thread. So for a comparison of the invisible thread, that's invisible thread, and this is the KO thread. So you can see the KO thread is marginally bigger, just smidgen, but not by a lot. So it's a good alternative to use if you just can't get your head around this stuff. But equally, there's not much difference in their width or their size. The invisible thread's just ever so slightly slimmer, and obviously it's a lot more shiny and a lot more slippery. This is more like a cotton, but then it's still got a bit of slip in it. So there we go. So there's just for reference sake, it gives you an idea of the difference between the two threads. So as well as looking at the options on the threads, there's also different options on the needles, because obviously you need to have a very small needle for it to go through the hole in the bead, and normally it's the eye of the needle that is the biggest problem. Now for purposes of this video, and to make things easy, I'm going to obviously use the stuff that would be readily available in the shops. So I'm quite partial to the John James size 10 sharp point bead embroidery needles. They do the job. As you can see, they've got a tiny little eye on the top. They're very slim, very easy to work with. I think the one that I've got here is a John James. Let me just check. Yep. So the one that we're actually going to use here, this is a John James needle. Don't know if it's going to focus for you, but it's a tiny little eye needle, and it's yay big. However, if you are the sort of person that is going to struggle massively with a bead needle that is that small, or has the eye is that small, so for threading it, it's going to be a problem, there is an alternative option. And the only reason I know about this is obviously because I did beading in back in the day. So you've also got something called a big eye needle. So here's one. Now obviously you can see it's massively bigger. There's your comparisons between the two. So this one over here is your John James size 10 beading embroidery needle, and this is your big eye needle. Now the reason it's called a big eye needle is exactly that. So if I just demonstrate for you, if I can do this. So if you look, you separate the needle in the middle. So it's fixed at this end and it's fixed at that end, but it has like a massive, great big long eye, which is the middle. And then what you do, if I can find a bit of cotton, is we use the KO thread, for instance. If we put that KO thread into the needle, she says, and I can't actually see what I'm doing. Right, there we go. So you put that into the eye of the needle, and as you can see, it slides up and down this very, very big eye. But once you've hooked it on and you pull it the same as you would if you was doing a needle, it's very much stuck. I mean, it is very, very big, and it's a bit on the bendy side. They're very, very flexible and bendy and very, very sharp. You tend to stab yourself quite a lot, but they work in the same way. But it's very good for people that struggle to sort of work with the eyes of the beading needles. But like I say, they're very, very fragile. They're very, very flexible. Look, they just bend about. So you would probably get through a lot of these to do a beading project, or a project where you're doing lots of beading. That's not to say that you can't use them, and it's very easy to get your thread out. You just pull it, that's it, and it comes out. So just as an alternative for those that might be interested in an alternative, this is another option for those that struggle with tiny-eyed needles. Honestly, do I use those? Not yet. My eyes are still hanging on in there, but only just. So that was basically just to give you a bit of an insight for those that are new to all of this. Obviously, for those that have done beading before, then, you know, I'm sort of not telling you how to suck eggs, but you know what I mean. So for the beads themselves, when I'm beading, I tend to use my bob tack. Here it is. Looks like a CD case. It's got a fluffy bit on the back so that when I sit it on the project, it doesn't just slide around. It actually, it stays on there. And then inside, as you can see, it's disgusting. Look at that. It's got fluff on it and everything. There's my beads, all attached. These are the beads that we're going to work with today. You can close that up when you're not working on it. Everything's nice and safe. And I just have it open on top of my work when I'm beading. So, but for those that don't want to use one of those, you've always got these. So you can just pour your beads into this little tray. Problem with this is if you hit it or knock it or it tips over, then you're going to be having beads going all over the place and all over your floor. And trust me, they're not easy to find and pick up. I have done it. I have actually dropped a whole pot. Before I waffle on too much more, should we start doing some beading with invisible thread? Like I said, if you're looking for some really good tutorials for using the Nymo thread, or even sort of adapting it for the KO thread, I would definitely suggest going and seeing the lovely Stitcherista. She done a video. I'll link it. I'll put a clickable link on this video to her video. I think it was video 97 or 96 or something, where she basically done a demonstration of beading. And also just ever so recently, the lovely Jessie Marie does stuff. But so if you're interested in that, then obviously I'll link that here so that you can head on over and go and see Jessie. But obviously for the demonstration of this video, I'm working with this gorgeous stuff, the invisible thread. So first of all, let's get our needle and get it. Okay, so here we are. So like I said, I'm using the number 10 John Jones beading needle or embroidery needle. Now you're all going to go shock horror now, because I'm going to show you what I do with this. Now because this thread is nylon, and even with the polyester it's still much more slippy than your bog standard thread. So I always, because I work with one strand, I will always tie a knot in this. Just because otherwise it will fall off the needle. You've got no way of keeping it on there. It just doesn't like to. So there we go. So don't all gasp. Shock horror, she's just put a knot. But when I say it's a knot, it is like a tiny knot because the thread is so thin. So if I get up closer, you can see there. It is the smallest knot in the world. It's not a big knot. In fact, where am I? Over here. You can barely see it. Come on. There you go. That is the knot there that you're looking at. It's so small. It's not a problem. Now, the only thing that you do need to do is to make sure that when you're as you're stitching with this, every now and then you just need to go and give both ends a little tug, because the knot does have a tendency of wanting to undo itself. So now I'm going to flip you over and show you how I anchor this to my project. Now obviously I can't just flip my project over because you're in the way with my camera. So let me just flip this over and then we'll come back. So bear with me one moment. Okay, so here we are. As you can see, I'm not proud. Welcome to the back of my chatelaine. It's not the tidiest looking thing in the world, I know that, and I'm sorry, but it's the way I roll. So this is is it really that untidy? No, it is really untidy. So anyway, there you go. You've seen the back of the chatelaine. It's not a pretty sight. So let me zoom you in and see if I can maneuver this a little bit. Okay, so here's my invisible thread on my needle. So what I will do is I will stick my needle just under 1 thread. There. And I'll pull through. But whilst I'm pulling through, I will keep hold of the bottom end. So if I sort of do this, you can see I've got hold of both ends. Here's my towel in between my fingers. So yes, you know what I'm going to do, don't you? You've got no choice here but to tie another knot. But because the thread is so small and so thin, it's never going to be a problem. You're never going to see it. So all we do, we just do a normal overhand knot. Give it a little tug, just for peace of mind. We'll do it again. Come on, there we go, there we go. She just let go of it, there it is. Okay, so as you can see, this is the working thread section, this is the towel. So what I'll do is make sure that one's out of the way, grab my working towel, or my towel of the working thread that I've just knotted, and I'll bring it down, not right to where it is, but sort of close, sort of 1/2 centimetre away. So let me get my fingers. Honestly, when you do cameras like this, it looks like you've got elephant fingers. So I'll bring it down and I'll just snip it off about 1/2 centimetre away from where I just tied the knot. Now I won't just leave that there, because although that is attached, very attached, see, give it a tug, although that's attached, I still like to secure it a bit more than that. So then what I'll do, I will then run the needle just under, in the same vicinity, a few times, just to help secure that. There you go. It's all nice and snug and tight. So at this point, that to me, as far as I'm concerned, is anchored. So now we're going to flip you back over and we're going to get going with some beading on the front. So bear with me again. Okay, so here we are back at the front of my work. Let's see if I can bring some light in. There we go. So as you can see, we're back to the beginning, or back to the front. So let me zoom you in a bit. Move that forwards. Okay, so obviously we're going to bring, now I always do my stitches bottom left to the top right, leg 1, and then bottom right to top left as leg 2. So here's my needle coming up at bottom left. What you don't see whilst I'm doing this is underneath the project, I'm constantly keeping tension on the invisible thread underneath. So here's the invisible thread, and for some reason we don't seem to have any light to see it. So let me see if I can change the lighting so that you can see. So there we go, there's the invisible thread. So we brought him up from our bottom left hand corner. So we get our beads, and then to get the bead off of the bob tack, where are we? There we are. I just slide my needle in, grab it with my finger and pull it off. It's as simple as that. So we let him drop down there. So there he is, down at the bottom. Now, the importance of the way I work with this thread is that I've always got some form of tension on the thread. So right now, I'm just holding this with my finger down onto the fabric. One, because it keeps the bead out of the way. and 2, it gives me orientation of where it is, especially in bad light when you can't see. Also makes it so that I can also see what I'm doing to get my needle in. So now, obviously, as you can see, we've got the invisible threads. I'm holding it down, and then I'm going to go into my top right. So I'm going to do my first leg, if you like. But notice at this point, I've still got hold of the thread. I'm not letting that thread go at this point. So I'm just holding it against the fabric here. The light's still not working, is it? Does that help? Maybe. Okay, so we've got tension on our thread. Oh, not tension, but I've got hold of it with my finger. So we've done leg 1, even though we haven't put the bead down there. Now I'm going to bring the needle back up as if I'm about to start my second leg. Still, I've got hold of the thread. I'm not allowing the thread to do anything. So I'm sort of, there you go. So you can see the tension's there. So we've now got the thread coming out of hole 1, going through the bead, looping round my finger, going down into hole 2, which is your first half of your cross, and then the thread's coming back up at hole 3, and still I've not settled the bead down. So it's at this point that I'll keep my finger in there. As I pull this one that's coming out of hole 3, I allow my finger to slide forwards until I get to a point where you just let it go and you settle your bead down. Now obviously that's on a diagonal. We don't want ours on a diagonal. I always do a full cross through mine. So again, I've got hold of my threads. I'm going to stick my finger on it. I'm not actually applying any pressure to it. I've still got movement. Right, now this is where it all differs slightly. So I can see what I'm doing, I, using my needle, lift my bead back up. See? Which then allows me, at this point, to know where I'm putting my needle. So there you go. You can see what I'm doing. Now, this is the bit. So everyone's under the impression that the importance of pulling the needle back down through the hole is the key, but it's not. So I stab the needle in, like so. But the bead's still up here, and obviously I've got my thread. Now I'm still holding on to the thread that came out of hole 3. When I pull on that thread, it forces the bead to sit down. And it's only at that point, so I've got tension on this third, where it comes out from the third hole. That's how I make the bead sit down. I'm still holding that thread with my finger, and then at that point I will worry about what the top thread does, and I'll pull my needle through, keeping my finger on the thread so that nothing can get hooked up, nothing can get stuck, and there you go, he's down. So you'll see it's slightly different. It's just a case of making sure that you don't allow for the threads to get all hooked up, and it's not about the thread coming down, it's more about the thread from the back. So we'll go again and I'll explain it again, see if it makes any sense. So we bring our needle up here in our bottom left. Again, I'm holding the thread at the back so that I make sure that it doesn't get all knotted till we get tension on our thread. See? We stick our bead on. Once you get into the flow of it, it's actually really easy. So there we go, our bead's down. I'm just holding the thread out the way over here, which allows me to see what I'm doing. I've still got my hand on it, and I'm going to pull that thread through to do my first leg until I get to about there. So I've got tension on both bits. Now I'll bring my needle back up at hole 3, and pull then. That's when I allow my bead to sit down, which gives me that on a diagonal. So if you like diagonal stitching, that's how you do it, without the invisible thread hooking up on anything. However, I like full cross. So again, I hold this thread down. So this is our key thread. This thread that we're about to put our finger on is the key to the whole thing. So we hold down here, but only enough that we're holding it. We're not applying any pressure to it, which then allows me to put my needle in the bead and lift. And because it's a slippery thread, it's easy to lift the bead up. So we lift the bead. I tend to hold the bead with my finger to then work out, okay, where do I need to stick my needle? Okay, so we're going to stick our needle there, because that is hole 4. Now, if you watch, if I grab the thread that's underneath my finger here, this one, I don't know if I can move all these other threads out of the way, there you go, because that's our top threads. So we move all that out of the way. So the only thread that I'm pulling on is the one that's just come out of hole 3 with the needle in, with the bead attached to the needle. So when I pull, and if you look, I don't know how much you can see, there's a loop, which is what is actually going to pull the bead down. So I'm still pulling on leg 3, and you'll see that it snugs it down. So now, at this point, once I've got tension on this bottom thread, now, and whilst I'm still holding it, I'll pull the needle down through the fabric. And again, the bead sits down. So it's all about what goes on at the back rather than what goes on at the top, if you see my point. So we'll go again. So we come up, bottom left, holding the thread at the back so that it doesn't get snagged. We pick our bead up. We drop our bead down. There he is. And again, hold the thread out the way with one finger. Go down. Oh, is that? Yeah, that's right. Go down in our top right to do our first half. Again, I've still got hold of this. I'm not letting go of this. I bring it down until the thread is sort of, I can feel the tension on both this one and this one. Move it all out of the way. So again, I've still got hold of all the thread. I've not let go of any thread yet. Then we come up at leg 3, which is our bottom right. Bring our needle up until we feel the tension, and at that point, we slide our finger forwards and allow for the bead to sit down. So that's if you're doing the half. Now we move this thread out the way. Well, not out the way, but we put it somewhere where you can rest your finger on it so that you can feel it. See? So I just rest my finger on there. I stick my needle back into my bead. I lift the bead, and because it's slippery stuff, and at that point I grab that bead. So the bead's on the needle. Still got hold of the thread down here, underneath my finger. Down here, that's actually what stops, that allows me to move things backwards and forwards by adding pressure to that. So at this point I can now see where I now need to put my bead. I don't allow too much flop around. So if I pull this up too high, and then obviously when I start doing this, this is all curling, just pull the thread that's under, coming out of leg 3, because that's the one that's doing all the work. That's the one that if it's going to snag, that's where it will happen. So there we go. So this is leg 3. I want to stick my needle in at leg 4. Again, I've just stuck my needle in. That's all I've done. You can see the beads halfway up the needle, and it's at this point that I'll pull leg 3. So as you pull leg 3, you'll see this little bobble bit where it's starting to make its way through the bead. It pulls the bead down, and then you snug it down. And it's only at that point, once I know that all the thread that's working with thread 3 has been pulled through and the bead is nice and snug, keeping my finger on it, I use my other finger to push the needle through the bead, keeping my finger there so that nothing snags up, nothing gets curled around anything, and it sits my bead down. So I don't know if this is making any sense to anybody else. I do hope it does. But this is how I bead without anything snagging. So again, bring my needle up, get my bead on, put it down. Again, I've got hold of the thread. I go in my first half, still holding my thread, wait for the tension, which I feel, hook my finger into that loop, because obviously that's my half cross, pull it up out the way so that I can see what I'm doing, nothing's crossing, come up at leg 3, still got my finger in the thread, pull it through, let it sit down. Again, move our thread down out the way. We're not applying pressure, we're just holding it. We just can feel it. At this point, I pull my bead away. As you can see, that allows me to then see where I'm going. Oh, I've let go of my thread. There we go. Oh, that's where I'm going to go in. Actually, that's not where I'm going to go in. I'm going to go in there. And again, I'm just going to pull this thread. That's all I'm doing. I'm not touching anything to do with the top. All this top stuff, not relevant right now. I'm just looking at this thread down here. So start to pull the thread from leg 3 till it's nice and tight. Then I'll push the needle down through the bead and keep my finger there so that nothing snags, and down it goes. So whilst you're, oh, let's move that. Whilst you're here, I'll just sit and stitch and do my beading so that you can see it in action. Although what I didn't do, which I did tell everyone that you need to do, is periodically, every now and then, the knot that you put to hold the needle on, you just need to double check it every once in a while, just to make sure it's not trying to flick itself off. So every now and then, just make sure that it's still nice and tight. Okay, so here I go again, grabbing my bead. I don't know whether this would make sense to anybody else, but once you get your head around it, it makes total sense once you see what the threads are actually doing. Because it's when you know what the threads are doing that you realise how easy it is for something to snag. So there we go. First bit, holding my thread down out the way, grabbing it, pull it up, find my spot, my sweet spot, give my third leg a little tug, push it down, pull it through. Nothing snags. Nothing getting hooked up. It's not making a big crazy mess anywhere. The biggest problem with the invisible thread is people say they can't see it, but that's one of the upsides of doing it the way I do it. Because I've constantly I'm touching the thread, it gives me some sort of idea relatively where the thread is. So there we go. So at all times I know where my threads are, so that they can't twist, they can't get stuck around each other. I also can't see at this angle. Okay, there we go. Let it sit down. Pull my thread out the way. Pick it up with my needle. Pull it out of the way so I can see where I'm going. Stick it in. Pull my thread from leg 3. Stick my needle down. And again, always keeping hold of the thread. As long as you always keep hold of the thread, it doesn't get hooked up or get stuck. or curl around itself, because that's the biggest problem with the invisible thread, is that it starts to get stuck or twist around something, but you can't see it. So because you can't see it, before you know it, it's already hooked up, and then you've got a really hot mess that you need to try and get yourself out of, which with this stuff is so much more difficult. So again, stick him in, keep my finger in him, pull him out the way, coming up, leg 3, there's the tension, nothing snagging, pull him down, hold my thread out the way, pull him up, stick it in, pull leg 3, push my needle down, keeping the tension on the thread still. There we go. It's as simple as that, she says. Once you do it a few times and you get the knack of it, it's actually really easy. And you'll see that it doesn't, you know, this invisible thread isn't like your worst enemy ever. Just as long as you understand that it's not about all the thread that's going on the top. It's not about all this bit. It's all about what's going on really underneath, and just keeping some pressure or keeping some tension on it, so that, and by keeping it in your hand allows you to know where it is. You don't need to necessarily see it. So there we go. There's one. Pull him out of the way, holding the threads out my way so that I can go in and do my third leg, my third coming up to do the second half. Keep it tight, or not tight, but keep it taut. Pull it up. Use that third, by pulling on this allows me to push this up and down, but you'll see how slippy it is. It's that easy. It allows me to then stick my needle in. Off camera you can't see this, just move my fingers down, there you go. I'm pulling this just here. All the action is happening with the left hand. Push down with my right for the needle, and down he goes. And it actually goes really quite quickly. It's not, right, you'll see, I'm going to demonstrate this if I can, if it'll let me demonstrate. So I don't know if you can see there on my finger, the loop starting to undo where the eye of the needle is. So every now and then, periodically, when I see that, or I start to feel that, I just give it another tug. And then it goes back to normal. The knot's back down here. That's the only thing that I would say. Every now and then it might drop off the needle, but worst case scenario, you just rethread it and put another little knot by the needle. It's not a snag problem. It's not where all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got a ton of invisible thread that's just sort of all hooked up and caught up somewhere. Okay, so here we are. I've got my thread out of the way. There's my leg 3. Pull him up. Let that drop down. Hold that. Allow him to come up. Stick the needle in. And again, all the action is happening here on leg 3. I'll give it a little tug until I see it all just once I feel that goes taut, then I can stick my needle back down. Still holding everything, still making sure nothing's snagging. Job done. So there you go. That is it. That is how I do my beading with invisible thread, bearing in mind that this isn't even my preferred type. This is the real horrible, high shine, slippery nylon thread. This is not the polyester one that I was talking about, which is actually a little easier to use because it's not so shiny. It's more, well, it's just easier. Here we are, got hold of my needle, stick him in, pulling on leg 3, not touching the top, not touching the needle end at all. Down he goes. Still got hold. What I'll do, I'll zoom the camera out a little bit so that I can show you. Obviously I've shown you close up, so maybe if I show you a little bit further away so that you can actually see what my hands are doing, it might help. Although you might just get a whole lot of hand. Possibly. Okay, where should we go now? So let's go here. So here we are. Coming up, I've still got hold of the thread at the back just to guide it through. Picking up my bead. Threading him down. Now, stick him over there. Going in, leg 2. See, now I've made a hot mess. There you go. Got him. Holding him out of the way with my fingers. Coming up at 3. Allowing him to sit down. Keeping hold of the thread down here. Pull him up. Sit him down. Pull on thread 3. Push down. Again, still got hold of everything. I've not let anything go. It's only when it gets down there that I'll let go. There we go. Coming up at 1. Thread our needle, though I think I've got 2 beads. I have. There he is. Come down. Beads out of the way. Can you hear my dog? He's doing his heavy breathing impression. Allow him to come down. Pulling up. Sticking in. Pulling through. Pushing down. Still got hold. Not letting go. We're right to the last minute. There you go. So I hope that helps. I think I'll sit and finish the rest of this. And then I really do need to go outside and put some more plants to bed, because we are destined for some really, really cold weather. Although nothing like what the US is getting at the moment, or certain parts of the US that are currently getting snow. It's just like, wow, snow. I thank God we haven't got snow. Okay, so there's my thread. Got it in my finger up here. Leg 3. Let's sit down, holding the thread out the way, bringing my needle up. Allows me so that I can see where I need to go. Pull on leg 3 to bring the bead down so that I know that nothing's snagged, nothing's caught. Stick my needle down, still got hold of that thread, and allows for it to come down. Right, where else have I got to go? Got to go over here. That's the one thing I like about invisible thread. You have the freedom with invisible threads to go anywhere that you like, and you can't see the thread, so you can carry it, which means you can go all over the place with it. Okay, so here we go again. I've got my thread. I'm doing my first half. Put him up out of the way. Where are you? There's leg 3. Pull him through. Let him sit down. Oh. Readjust the knot on the needle. Pull him up out of the way so I can see where I'm going. Stick him in. Pull my thread. Brings my bead down. Stick him in. Keep in hold. And as you can see, I've beaded this whole section and nothing snags. Just by keeping it, I think sometimes it helps as well just to have your finger on the thread, so that way you always know where the thread is. So even if you can't necessarily see it, you can feel it. So there we go. And it works when you're beading one next to the other really closely, because that way sometimes you need to try and move the bead out of the way to make sure that you are actually going down the right hole. Well, I do anyway. Maybe it's just me. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We're all done. We're all beaded. She's done. Well, that one is. That's all the beads that need to go in that one. Let's see if I can zoom you out. So there you go. Still got a bit of a ways to go on this one. So then I was going to quickly show you how I finish my thread on the back with my invisible thread. So I'm just going to flick this over and show you how I finish the thread. Okay, so here we are back on the back. We've finished our beading. Here's the oh, sorry, jogging you. Here's the invisible thread. So what I do is I will run the invisible thread the same as you would if you're going to run it through the back of, like when you're normally doing it. So I'll run it once through there. But then what I'll do is I will do a couple of the loops. So as I bring it through, like so, see if I can do it with the other hand so I'm out of the way. So I'll pull him through, and then where the loop is still sticking out, I'll catch that loop and I'll give it a tug. And then I'll finish by just running it under some stitches. There you go. And then I'll just cut that off, like so. And as if by magic, we are done. So there you go, people. And you get a good butcher's at how disgraceful the back of my projects are. So that is it, people. That is how I do my stitching, how I do my beading with the invisible thread. As you can see, there's lots of beads on this piece. Let's see if I can zoom you in. There's lots of shiny stuff. Let's see if I can move it down and across. There you go. So again, beads, beads, beads. All these sections are beads. So yeah, lots and lots of beads. And my little square crystals. So, and all of this is beaded with invisible thread. So, and I've not had any problems with snagging or anything along that lines. I mean, if as long as you keep the tension, oh, excuse me, as long as you keep the tension on the working threads, and obviously you keep your hand underneath at the back, so that as you're pulling it up, you're just guiding it through your fingers to make sure that nothing knots. it's fine. So yeah, so we've beaded that. I now need to go and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more trees. I'm having a bit of an issue with these waffle things. So I took the waffle out on the other side because it was wrong. And I tried it again and it was wrong again. So I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna go round and do the treetops, and I'll work out what I'm doing with these waffle things, or the woven baskets, which are actually the flower pots. And once I get it right once, then all I've got to do is just replicate the others all at the same time, because I think sometimes if you do it once, leave it alone for sort of a few weeks and then go back to it, you've forgotten how you did it the first time. So I think that's my game plan and plan of action. So there you go, people. That's my beading. I hope it helps for anyone that's actually considering using invisible thread, or was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure I want to touch that. You can see that just with a little bit of work, it's actually really good. It's no different to any other type of thread. It's just how you handle it, really. So, okay. So there you go, people. That's how I do mine. You got to see the best and the worst of my chatelaine. So you've seen how bad the back is. So don't judge. No judging on the back. It's all about the front. So I love my chatelaine. So it was great to be able to sit and do my beading with you and show you how I do it. If you've got any comments or questions, by all means, leave the comments and questions below and I'll answer as many as I can. I hope it makes sense. Bye bye for now. Bye.